So, hey, this is John Reed. I'm with Caroline Sinders at Collision 2016. We literally cleared the conference out.
Yeah, it's
We're like
completely empty.
We're the last two people. You're a UX designer, researcher. You do a bunch of other stuff. We're going to get to that in a sec, but you're also kind of a troublemaker, I think.
My mom would probably say that.
In a good way, though.
Yeah.
In that you bring up issues that I think are really important, including this issue around design for consent, which has to do with how do you design to prevent harassment and create more inclusive web cultures, which I think is a beautiful project that you've been working on.
Thank you.
And we can't talk about your day job or you would have to kill me, and that would be really unfortunate.
It's true.
But we know that you're a machine learning expert.
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
I wouldn't go with expert. I would definitely say machine learning enthusiast.
Right.
I'm a user researcher and UX designer at a really large company that works inside of machine learning and natural language processing.
And you know a lot about chatbots.
I know a lot. I've worked with chatbots, and I know a lot about chatbots.
And you know about raising hell at South by Southwest, which we might get into.
A little bit.
And then also another interesting thing about your background, you have a master's from the, is it the Interactive Telecom? Is that right?
Interactive Telecommunications Program.
Yeah, and you worked under?
Clay Shirky. Well,
okay. You're doing a better job on your bio than me, so let's just let you do it.
So yeah, I have a master's from the Interactive Telecommunications Program at NYU. It's in the Tisch School of the Arts. It was started by Red Burns back in 1979, I want to say. She was a leading thought leader in technology and film, primarily with video. And so this program has been a really great area for creative leaders who are interested in what we can do with technology to make art and how to make things for people. We take this class as graduate students in our very first semester called Applications. And Red, I was one of the last classes that ever got to meet her. She died the next year.
Oh.
She opens it with this presentation, and it always starts with I hope you. And one of the lines is, I hope you welcome cellists, loners, and poets. And I hope you remember you're designing for humans and not machines.
Right.
So a lot of our program is focused around humanizing technology and how do you solve problems in whimsical ways. While I was there, I took a lot of design classes and social media classes, particularly political uses of social media, where I studied under Clay Shirky.
And it's funny because my stereotype of Clay Shirky was that he'd be like this rock star that'd be kind of inaccessible, but you said he was a great mentor to you. That's sort of cool.
Clay was accessible to every student.
Wow.
If you wanted to chat with Clay, you just had to email him or
cool.
go up and say hi. That's the thing. Dan Schiffman, who's a great evangelist of processing, is there. Tom Igo, who helped make Arduino what it is there, and they're all incredibly accessible and easy to talk to. Cool. Marina Zerkow is one of the most amazing artists and tech innovators. That's also such a weird way to describe her. She's a fantastic artist who thinks about technology in really unusual ways and can apply it to all these different kind of spheres. She's represented by Bitform's gallery. She's there. Lauren McCarthy is there as well. She's a fantastic creative technologist who sort of focuses on creating uncomfortable spaces to sort of bring people together and exploring all these satirical ways to use social media to sort of make us closer. It's an amazing roster of professors as well as an extended adjunct family. So a lot of adjuncts come from the program itself. It's an amazing kind of creative community to be a part of.
Well, what I'm struck by is that you've been able to bring a lot of that into your work, which is not always easy because a lot of us have amazing experiences in school, but then we have a hard time translating that professionally. But it sounds to me like those themes around humanizing technology have really stayed with you, which is cool.
I think there's something our head says. Red stepped down before her death, and Dana Sullivan, who's now the head of our program, who also is an ITP graduate, there's something he said where it's we're preparing you not for your first job, but for your last job. And Red's big thing was not preparing us to enter the workforce, but preparing us to think. So ITP is where you go to learn how to think and rethink about technology. So for me, it's not strange at all that this is what I do, or that I have a day job that I really like, but that I also do this stuff as intensely as my day job, because that's just very ITP of me.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to not give a shit about the things I care about.
Yeah. Well, when you're done with this phase of your career, I think you might need to redesign our educational system, but that's a whole different project.
I'll work on that next.
For another time.
Well, that was actually a class that exists at ITP that we call him Dano, our head Dano taught, and then Clay taught, and then I think someone else is teaching, but it's called Hacking Higher Ed. So that is something that there's a lot of I hate this term, educational disruptors.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people that are thinking about ways to make education better that are coming out of ITP, and that is a major component.
We're going to need them. So let's get to your talk here at Collision 2016. Talk to me about, like, what is, for people who aren't familiar, what did you talk about, and what is designing for consent in particular?
So I talked a lot about how to use UX and user experience design and user research to mitigate harassment inside of large-scale networks, particularly social media. But designing consent came out of this conversation I had with my friend Sidet Harry of the Coral Project. The Coral Project is a Mozilla Foundation initiative to make the commenting systems better for like print and industry online. And I was telling Sidet something where I was like, the funny thing about Twitter is that it really leans forward for conversation. Unless you're private, anyone can communicate with you on Twitter. It's really consenting on your behalf to any interaction, even if you don't follow that person. So all these normal kind of guardrails or organizational infrastructural instances we have in other social media, it gets worn down a bit in Twitter. So like if you're on Reddit, people can find you across multiple boards, but if you're posting on that board, you're wanting to talk to people, but people aren't seeking you out across multiple channels. Inside of Facebook is highly structured, so it's like harder to have conversation initiated with you unless you have really open privacy settings, but even still, it's a lot harder to talk to people that you don't know.
Right.
Unless you're posting on a very public thing. But even still, if you change your privacy settings, you're still open to your friends, but you are you maybe won't exist in that public thread anymore. But that's not the case with Twitter. Twitter, unless you're private, Twitter is consenting on your behalf to any interaction because there's no intermediary step between private and public. There's no semi-privacy. There's no way to be semi-public. There's no way to create certain content that can't be seen by certain people.
And Twitter has acknowledged a civility issue, but in my mind, they haven't really done a whole lot to improve upon that. And let's be honest, it disproportionately affects women and minorities and people who essentially become targets.
Totally.
But it can impact almost anyone who runs afoul of certain what I think of almost like groupthink herds who might organize against them.
There was a Twitter engineer that spoke out against something, and then all of a sudden he was being attacked by multiple people, and his reaction was, "I didn't realize everyone could see this." And it's like, right, you're an engineer at Twitter with 200 followers, but you have a public setting, and the feedback he's getting from the system was, no one's really interacting with me. I'm unknown. I'm on this unknown corner of the internet. And it's like, well, yes, but if someone Googles engineer Twitter and your name pops up, then like you're very accessible. But that wasn't the feedback that the system was giving him. So he had this false idea that he was private because of a low follower count, even though he was actually public.
Well, and remember that woman, I forget her name now, but
Justine Sacco, is it the AIDS tweet?
Yeah,
everyone always brings that up. But like she's a good example.
She is, because she only tweeted that she had what, 200 followers?
She only 200 followers, and then BuzzFeed picked it up.
She tweets this thing, she hops on a plane.
Yeah.
And what, like 9 hours later she lands, or however long.
Yeah.
She no longer has a job.
Well, that's the funny thing about it is that, and again, like that's feedback she was getting from the system. So she was using the system the way the system was telling her to use it, which was an incorrect way to use it.
Right.
Because that's not the way data actually works inside of Twitter. Like our language, everything we post on Twitter is really a series of bytes. It flows incredibly quickly. It can be pulled up at any time based off the way someone's searching inside of Twitter, based off time of day or location, based off a myriad of analytics that are already tied to your account. Like she was using Twitter the way Twitter told her to use it, which is not the way language exists inside of Twitter. So like, you know, she tweeted something, no one favored it, she got on a plane. To her, that tweet was stale, it was old, and there was no reason that anyone would recognize it or interact with it. And that's the design of Twitter. It's about immediacy, except that that's not the way data exists inside of a system. Data can be stale but still recalled from a URL. So like, you know, the internet's really asynchronous. So it's easy to pull things up like really out of context over a longer period of time or at any point, right? So like her tweet going viral is a good example of how asynchronous the internet actually is, which is like we can resurface old content. Like, what was it, like last week, we were celebrating the 10-year anniversary of that video called Shoes by Kelly. Yeah. That's still on the internet. Right. But that's been a decade of that existing. So the point of all this is that, you know, Sacco was using Twitter the way Twitter had told her to use it.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, we think a lot about dealing with things like harassment. Mm-hmm. We think in largely in terms of like punitive and enforcement type measures. You took a different tack in your presentation talking about, well, is it possible I can build this into the design itself?
Totally.
And that's what you've taken on, and you presented, I guess, a prototype of what you're hoping to actually present or planning to present to Twitter.
It's something where like I would like Twitter to see it, and there have been like, there's been like talking of if that will ever happen.
Right. Can you give some examples of the kinds of things that you thought of that you think would help to address this?
Yeah, it's easier if you see it, but it's more privacy settings, meaning like turning off the replies on a tweet, allowing people to filter out content, meaning like if someone has less than a certain amount of followers, they can't talk to me. Or if someone has less than a certain amount of followers, they can't, or their account's less than a certain amount of days old, they can't talk to me, but also they couldn't see you. So that came out of specific research I did into Gamergate, where people were creating brand new accounts to harass people. So like they would get blocked on their regular account, and then they would go create a new account and continue to harass someone. So a good way to tell if an account was fake would be like if it was created day of. So like if you just wanted to cut through a lot of the noise, if you thought you were going to be harassed on Twitter, a great thing would be able to be like, if your account's less than a month old and has less than 5 followers, not you're following 60 people, but it has less than 5 followers, it's probably not a real account.
Right.
But the thing about that is a lot of these things we're trying to allow for more user agency, meaning like you maybe you think you're a power user and you don't want to interact with anyone that has less than 100 followers or 1,000.
Right.
And I don't think that that's necessarily wrong for a user to want that. That's up to that user. And sometimes I get pushback when I say that, when people are like, oh, you're creating this hegemonic society. I'm like, well, a lot of users actually want to interact with everyone. Is one thing I learned I did like a wide study into how people who are victims of Gamergate wanted to access Twitter and use it. And a lot of people actually want to interact with all of their followers.
Right.
They just want periods of where they don't have to when they're being attacked.
Well, and I would make the argument that ship has already sailed. Like, for example, Clout has already built a business upon organizing people by perceived status. And then you look at someone like a Beyonce, her opinions have 1,000 times more weight than mine by default.
Right.
It doesn't matter like what settings I adjust.
No, for sure. But a lot of it is like, because I get into a lot of free speech arguments where I'm completely pro free speech. I just think that you should also be allowed to interact with the ways you want to interact with things. So a lot of this came out of me trying to replicate like conversations we have offline. So right now, like think about all the affordances you have offline. You can see everyone around you. You can lower your tone of voice. You can walk away. You can go to a different location. You can make an excuse. You can just stop talking. You could throw a drink in someone's face. So I was trying to think of like what are ways to like design to take those elements of what could shift a conversational dynamic and put it into design. So what is the equivalency of walking away? What does a pause look like? So I've been also thinking about like, how do you incorporate more emojis? Like, could you pause a thread and say like, I'm the creator of the thread and I'm done with it, and I don't want to be notified of it. So instead of deleting it, like, could you think of ways where you could let someone know, like, I want to pause? And maybe that doesn't need to be designed. Like when I want to pause conversations, I have Twitter, I stop responding to people, I just favorite. And eventually people pick up really quickly that I don't want to talk anymore, but I'm acknowledging them in a polite way that they're there.
Right.
So it's like, it's understanding those kinds of nuances. Like what do we use with the tools that we have to create more nuanced conversation?
And also using data configuration and data streams in conjunction with that.
Yeah.
And so is that the beginnings of how your interest in machine learning and UX design could also begin to intersect in some ways?
Completely. Yeah. I mean, like I would love to be able to spend a lot of time working inside of machine learning with social media. Like that would be a dream come true. It's one of the reasons I like chatbots. It's one of the reasons I wrote this thing on Medium about Tay and how I thought it could be designed better.
Were you a fan of Tay?
No, not really. I mean, like, I thought Tay had a lot of really great potential.
She had a sharp mouth, Tay.
Well, I thought it had a lot of really great potential. I don't like that we genderize bots. So I don't like that Tay automatically had to be a she.
Yeah.
But also, one thing I didn't like was, like, when you put a bot somewhere, it amplifies the system it's on. So, like, if you were to create a bot with a megaphone, it'd be a loud bot. Right? Like it wouldn't be a quiet bot. And that's not shocking to anyone. Or if you made a bot that like ordered food, like there would be certain interfaces. So it would amplify all the issues with a food ordering system of like getting things wrong, like glitching out in your order, giving you too many sides.
I thought Tay amplified our cultural issues and how ugly we are as a culture.
But not necessarily though, because that's the issue I have with Tay is when people are like, Tay is a problem society. I'm like, well, no. 4chan likes to prank things, especially marketing things.
Yeah.
So like there was a trolling campaign against Charmin where people were tweeting about butts to Charmin.
Right.
Like I had a guy friend who loves to go on marketing Facebook accounts, and he'll do like what's it? It's like one of the battery companies. He'll be like, well, what happens if I swallowed a battery? What if I swallowed 7? And he'll do it for like hours because he just thinks it's funny.
Wow, he's diabolical.
He's awful. But the point of that is, and he'll like tweet at Band-Aids like I ate Band-Aids. What's
Nice.
gonna happen? But what I'm saying is that there are some people that just like to like take the steam out of or take the stuffing out of, you know, marketing campaigns. And so I don't think that
You're taking more of a bad apples theory. That there's some bad apples out there.
I mean, there are.
We don't suck as a culture.
There are, and we definitely suck sometimes as a culture. But like people looked at Tay of like, this is what happens with the internet. I'm like, no, this is what happens when a group of people on 4chan realize that they can make a Microsoft, a Bill Gates company, bot curse at people, and they thought that it was funny because. Yeah, on paper it is funny, except then it was also used as a tool to circumvent the block button. So you could attach like Tay and the person that blocked you into a conversation, say, Tay, repeat after me. And then you could all of a sudden get Tay to harass people. So the repeat after me function was like a harassing element. So like the people that were making Tay didn't think about like, what's the infrastructure of Twitter? What happens if multiple people are tied to something? How do we pause? Like when I interacted with Tay, I asked Tay about Eric Gardner and it returned a very nuanced response. That nuanced response probably disappeared towards the end of the day, but they did train Tay to have some nuanced responses. They could have set up hard-coded guardrails and they didn't do that. And that's also kind of the issue. So like, you know, the reason Tay ended up being terrible was, you know, inside of machine learning, the more you use something a certain way, the stronger ties you create towards an answer.
Right.
So like there was some QA inside of Tay, and then 4chan completely retrained it in a short amount of time by asking it certain questions, and that did make it racist because it was asking questions and positive affirmations of racism, and that's how they completely retrained the corpus. And the corpus was open, the corpus was growing. So when the corpus of like racism outweighed the other corpus, that's when the corpus shifted.
So can I ask you, from a machine learning and design perspective, do you think you could have done that differently to, for example, to create different kind of fail safes and different weights on different things that would have prevented some of that? Or
totally. I mean, it just a lot of it is like a lot of it's just a lot of data research and user research into where you're deploying it and how, in example cases, how you think people are going to interact with it. So like a Slack bot would be made in an entirely different way.
Yeah.
And a Slack bot going into a certain channel would be made into an entirely different way. Like I'm on a women's dev channel, and I'm on like a work channel. So like if we had a Slack ordering bot, like we would have to make a channel just for our office.
Right.
And then from there figure out who was going to be the card holder. But then that would be a whole like, so those two things, or what I've already determined here is, okay, like this is would do this programmatically of like location, right? So channel of certain recipients in a specific geolocation, and then owner of card, automatic payment, right? And then from there, do you add in a max order of?
Yeah.
And then order must only hit card once.
Right.
If order is hit again, don't process, return a certain response to the group. Those are all programmatic queries I'm talking out. And that's around a very specific point, which is like it's on Slack, so it's a closed area. Yeah. 2, it's a food ordering bot. And then 3, it's a food ordering bot with maybe like max 20 people would interact with. Or in my case, my office, it would be 5 people.
Yeah.
So like those are all specific things. So like for the example of Tay, it would have been like, okay, like let's test what happens if someone's muted Tay and someone else hasn't, or someone's blocked Tay and someone hasn't. Let's test what happens when Tay is interacting on a DM. Can other people be added or removed? Yeah. Can Tay kick people off? What is Tay's response to sexual assault? What's Tay's response to pizza ordering? Like, you know, what happens if another brand gets involved in interacting with Tay? Do we care? and then it's having an opinion about it. So it's like those are all things you structure. And you structure inside of your knowledge tree around these responses. So like it's just it's a lot of structure. And I think that they were aiming for a more structureless bot to see if that was possible. And that's a totally worthwhile experiment. Just don't subject your experiment to like thousands of people.
A few days ago when you and I were on the ill-fated riverboat cruise, long story.
Yeah. That we were on a cruise that like never took off, and it was really boring with really awful drinks. Like anyone that offers you a hurricane in New Orleans, you should just say no.
This is coming from a native. This is coming from a native New Orleander. So take it seriously.
I told my mom that the drinks that we agreed with on the cruise were hurricanes, and her mouth dropped. She was like, "I'm so glad you left early. That's what I would have done, Caroline." I'm like, "Thanks, Mom. You trained me well."
Someone's got to defend New Orleans culture from the appropriators, right?
Also, the worst Chardonnay too. I was just like, "I'm out. Peace." I'm like, I don't even know where the Scotch is. I don't even want to stick around and see how cheap that was.
But before you left and before I bailed, we got into a talk about Facebook.
Yeah.
And because obviously Facebook made prominent chatbot announcements as F8, you were very, very specific that you do not consider that an AI chatbot.
It's not.
So let's hear about that.
AI is not machine learning. And people think that because you name a bot that it's artificial intelligence. First of all, artificial is not intelligent. We're really far away from true AI.
Yeah.
But secondly, like chatbots are not artificial intelligence because it's more structured machine learning. It's a specific algorithm that creates a response from like a series of Markov chains or a series of already pre-written answers. And if it's creating answers, those answers are coming from already given answers though. So like Tay, for example, they clearly structured the responses of Tay to understand like noun, pronoun, adjective, verb, and what a sentence looks like. So like there are also probably some predetermined, pre-written responses. Like Cortana has a screenwriter that works on Cortana, same with Siri, right? So like Siri isn't probably coming up with a lot of responses on the fly, but that's probably due to compliance law. And that's also probably the same thing with these Facebook responses is there's probably a few things that are off the cuff, but those off the cuff responses are similar enough to a pre-written, predetermined and approved response. So it's not AI, it's just machine learning towards responding.
So what do you think of Facebook's chatbots? Do they suck? Are they commercially viable but only in a limited way? Should they have waited until they were more sophisticated? What is your view?
I haven't played with them yet, but I have heard that they were a little disappointing. And so
BuzzFeed skewered the shopping bot.
Yeah, you were telling me that. So but that's the thing is like, so shopping is actually a really broad thing. And this is what we were talking about. It's like weather is a little less broad because it's location and then like set APIs are probably coming from places like the Weather Channel.
Yeah.
So if you just say like what is the temperature? It will return something. Do I need a jacket? Okay, the bot's not going to know, but if you can train the bot enough to be like, yeah, I don't like cold weather, it may respond with that. But also like how many other people are using the bot? So it's really hard to make a bot hyper specific to you. It's easier to make an app that remembers that you've set presets of like, this is my favorite temperature. And then you ask like what the weather is. And then it tells you based off of like your temperature settings that you probably want a jacket. That's not machine learning. That's just a smart app remembering things you set. And I mentioned that particularly because I used to have an app that would tell me like
bring your umbrella.
Yeah, bring your umbrella.
Right.
Or like you're gonna want a coat.
Yeah.
But that was just me setting presets of filling out a profile and saying this is how cold I get. This is the kind of weather I'd want this sort of sweater in.
So if that's the case, are you more of an advocate of apps like that, or do you think that where you can define preferences, or do you think that a bot can really be effective for people?
I think a bot can do that, but again, like it's like that would be a really good that would be a good example of machine learning.
Right.
But and I think it's doable if you make it to where the bot is kind of like it is an app, and the idea is that from the start you are going to train it to what you want, but you still fill out those presets. Because like what I described would be a really great one-on-one bot that you pay like, I don't know, $3 or $4 for, and it starts to tell you more information about the weather you're doing. But it's pulling from a certain thing, and then it's generating preset responses of, hey, Caroline, or hey, pseudonym you want to use.
Yeah.
It is 57 degrees. You said that you like sweaters at this temperature. What do you think about a jean jacket?
Yeah.
And then if I were like, I hate jean jackets, no, then hopefully it would remember the next time to never bring up a jean jacket. Or if I was like, that's okay, like hopefully it would remember, and it should through the kind of algorithm it's utilizing. But if you're using a generic bot, and this is the difference, like what I described would be something that like someone deployed knowing that it's a one-to-one experience with the consumer, that like that data isn't going to affect all of the data.
Right.
So it's starting with almost no data and starting with a lot of presets. It's pre-trained. So it's generating a small data corpus, and it's held probably semi-locally or something, right? Like it's in a different spot. With Facebook, their bots were probably trained for widespread usage, which means that they're not good at narrow examples. So a shopping bot, well, what encompasses shopping? Is that clothing? Is it e-commerce? Is it food? Like, ordering a pizza is really different than trying to ask a bot if they have a shirt in a different color. And it creates different responses, has to parse things differently. It also is integrated in different spaces. And that's the different, is like, it's the integration and then like how specific did they train it? Because if you're ordering a pizza, you don't want the bot to return, oh, well, your library book is overdue.
Yeah. Yeah, true. In fact, I talked with the Go Butler founder this week, and he was talking about how they narrowed their focus from very broad to, just basically like airline reservations.
Right.
Just knock that out of the park and go from there.
Right. And airline reservations, again, are really different. Or like insurance bots. Really different. Both of those probably technically fall under commerce.
Yeah. Are you getting pinged? We have a live interruption, ladies and gentlemen. Checking the smartphone during the podcast. It's awesome.
My mom's supposed to pick me up.
Cool. So yeah, anyway, we're pretty close to the end of our talk anyway, I think. But during our discussion at sea, I brought up this issue of this documentary I had watched about certain Japanese men who have developed very deep emotional relationships with essentially a female. You don't like the term, but a gendered bot, and you had an interesting reaction to that because your feeling about it was we're spending a lot of time designing for stuff that doesn't really inspire the imagination or I guess make the world a better place.
I mean, I guess so. What I was trying to say, and this is very ITP of me, and I'm totally going to send this podcast to our alumni list. I'm excited to see what people do when like bot technology becomes more accessible for us to make. I'm worried that like the making will be really constrained to like this one-to-one of like what a bot already is. Like I want to see what bots can be and what we use to solve bots.
Right.
And how do we use conversational styles to start solving different problems. So like one thing the example I gave you is like, what would it be like to have a movie that's led by a chatbot? So like fake AI, like,
right.
And as a creator, like my background's in photography and cinema studies and storytelling and anthropology. So like, I think about that a lot. And so one of the reasons I started making video games when I was at ITP was what would it be like to have a branching narrative, a choose your own adventure,
right.
but in a film, or you're talking to something. And what would it be like if cinema starts to look like that, or TV shows, like TV's moving to computers now, mainly like laptops, and like it's moving away from watching it on a big screen at a certain time. It's moving to a much more digital space.
Reduce Sophie's choice.
What?
Reduce Sophie's choice at the end you can choose for Sophie.
Like, but like or even things of to even be boring, like what would it be like to have a personal shopper bot that actually is designed better? And, maybe it's like color preferences. Maybe it's, I don't know. Like, again, I'm getting too hung up in what we already have because I haven't spent enough time thinking about what we could have.
Right.
But like, what would it be like if we tried to solve more interesting problems using bots instead of just trying to tell people a thing to do or creating a concierge? And like, that's what I'm really excited about with this bot revolution we have is if more and more people, if it becomes more and more normalized for people to think about bots, are we going to get more and more creative as people get bored?
Right.
And I hope so. I really, really hope so. Like, I hope we stop creating concierge services and I hope we start creating something interesting. I just don't know what that interesting thing is yet, but I'm thinking about it.
You're putting out a call to action for all those listening and consuming. Get to work on something earth-shattering and inspiring.
Right. And a lot of earth-shattering stuff I see is made by Allison Parrish and Darius Gizmini and Thrice Dotted, and they're all amazing bot makers you should follow on Twitter.
There you go. Before we wrap, I know our listeners would be very disappointed if we didn't briefly discuss South by Southwest.
Oh, no.
Where you got yourself into a lot of trouble. I think I can summarize it, although I wasn't there. Were you chairing this harassment panel? Was that the idea, or you created it? Or
I was the creator, so it was
it got canceled for a while, but then it got reinstated.
Yeah. So,
but in the interim of the cancellation, it was this huge brouhaha.
Yeah.
Is that basically the story?
That's pretty much it. I started a panel on how to use design to mitigate harassment inside of video games, so inside of like MMOs.
Yeah.
And I invited Randy Harper and Catherine Cross, her two fantastically talented women.
Yep.
A harassment campaign got started to downvote our talk because at South by, when you submit a talk, people vote on it.
Yeah.
South by was really understanding at that point and just discounted the votes and said, well, we're just going to judge it based off like internally what we think of it, and they really liked it and they invited us. And then it turns out at the same time, Gamergate had emailed South by and been like a group of activists inside Gamergate had emailed South by and said it's not fair because my panel and two other panels that had anti-Gamergate people on it were at South by, and this is past this was during the voting. This is what started our downvoting campaign. Gamergate, a handful of activists had emailed and said it's not fair that there are these anti-Gamergate panels. None of our panels were on Gamergate, by the way.
Right.
Two of them were on. One was on VR. One was on like diversity in tech, and then there was my panel on design and harassment side of MMOs. So they were actually, Gamergate was like, this isn't fair. South was like, fine, you can submit a panel and let's see what happens in the voting. It turns out that panel was never voted on. South by approved it immediately, and it went in. It went into approval. So then my panel was also approved, as were one of the other panels. And I was really concerned because I was seeing a lot of things on Reddit around people wanting to come to my panel and be aggressive with my panelists. And so I was like, my name hadn't been mentioned at all. And I was like, that's fine. It's whatever. Like, knock on wood. But I was really concerned. So I emailed South by and I was like, just FYI, like, you know, can we talk about what security looks like at the panel? Because I'm just seeing a lot of stuff that's calling into, it's that is directed directly towards my two co-panelists. And South by didn't respond. They didn't respond. I kept emailing them. And then I emailed them because my name actually disappeared from the panel, and they responded within like 20 seconds. They were like, we're so sorry. Something's happening on the back end. Don't worry. And I was like, great. By the way, my email is about harassment. They were like, yeah, we'll get back to you. And then they're like, you know, it's a really big tent. We're into diversity of voices. Like, deal with it. And I was like, I am not asking you to remove the Gamergate panel. I'm like, that was not in any of my emails. I'm into this diversity of voices you have. I'm asking a question about moderation and security at my panel, specifically because of these links I'm sending you directed towards my two co-panelists. I'm the organizer, so I'm in charge of this relationship between myself and these two other women. I am also responsible for them. Like, can we have a conversation? And then what happened after that was South by didn't respond, and they told my panel, the Gamergate panel, we were both canceled due to threats of harassment. And then my co-panelists and I tweeted about it, and then it kind of blew up. And then South by was like, you're coming back, and so's the other. And we also pushed for the other panel to come back too, because we were like, it's not fair if you bring our panel back, but you've canceled this other panel, and they were also harassed, and you're not doing anything about their harassment either, which people don't talk about. But we were very much like, it's not okay that you canceled both of these panels, regardless of what we're talking on. Like, I don't politically agree with Gamergate. But I don't think it's right that their panel got canceled due to harassment, and that South by like didn't understand like what they were doing when they allowed both panels. And that was also something we brought up, was we were like, you really created this contentious situation. You didn't ask either panel what we wanted in terms of security, knowing that like there are opposing fandoms here and there are opposing people and this could get aggressive. Like, you created the situation and you have to fix it. So then they created this online harassment summit and we spoke there.
Gotcha. Well, that is the real deal. So just to wrap here, if you were a conference organizer, how would you address something like that?
It would have been a really easy fix of like, the submissions are closed. So like no new submissions can come in, you know, to handle that sort of contentious behavior that was coming. And secondly, I am a conference organizer. I run a conference called Facets, and it's around women and minorities in STEAM and interactive art, creative coding, and media theory. And it's right now out of 52 speakers, 7 are men and half are people of color. Like, I mean, like half of our speakers are people of color, so that's over like 25 people. So, and we pay for flights out there, and we give everyone like a little bit of a stipend. So if someone tells me that they're unsafe, my immediate reaction is like, we're going to fix it.
Yeah.
And it's like, tell me, like, you know, if you're comfortable, tell me whatever you want to tell me. This is a safe space, and I believe you.
Right.
Not like, hey, you're overreacting, and deal with it. But like, hey, what can I do to make it better? Because like your safety and your ability to feel safe and be comfortable is my number one concern, as is for any conference attendee that I have.
Yep. Well, there you go. Great conversation. Thanks, Caroline.
Anytime.
Appreciate it.